So I'd like to thank all of you for coming from all over the United States, it turns out, for this. I'm Dr. Steven Greer, and I'm the director of the Disclosure Project and CSETI and SeriousDisclosure.com and the Orion Project. These projects I'll explain very briefly in a moment. The purpose of this seminar today is really to go in depth and share things I have not shared publicly about how disclosure has happened, because it has happened and is happening, and what the process was that led up to that. But I first want to thank you guys for coming here and having the interest, because it's the public that has actually made disclosure happen from the beginning. Although it was requested by some folks at the CIA, which we'll get into, it's the public that's really enabled it, including all the now 550 top secret military and corporate witnesses that have come forward. Now, I want to state that at this point, the numbers are continuing to grow. And most of those witnesses are people who've been in the intelligence community or Department of Defense, some branch of the armed forces, or corporations that deal with so-called unacknowledged special access projects, super secret projects that deal with UFOs. And only about a fifth of them have consented to be filmed and have their persons identified to the public. The reason for that is fear and concern for their own privacy and concerns over some issues that I don't think we need to worry about at this point around the legalities, and we'll get into this over the course of the day. And the main purpose of the Disclosure Project was really to educate the public that we're not alone in the universe, and that this has been known by highly classified projects for 70 years, and that those projects have, unfortunately, become illegal and unconstitutional operations that operate transnationally. Note that I said transnationally, not internationally. The secrecy that surrounds this issue is so extraordinary that most presidents are not briefed on it, and if they're briefed in a way that is perfunctory and very, very limited and designed to control their actions. For example, Ronald Reagan was provided some information, but only insofar as it was false, so that he would support SDI, the Star Wars missile defense program, so that he could justify the spending. But for the most part, presidents since Eisenhower have not had appropriate access control. Now, what I mean access control? This means not only access to the program, but control over them. And people need to make at the very beginning, a very clear understanding between knowing and being able to do anything about it. So every single president has been interested in this. Famously, Jimmy Carter, as he was the president-elect, was asked the outgoing CIA director, George Bush Sr., to brief him on this issue because he had had a sighting. Some of you may know this while he was governor of Georgia. I have that report. And President-elect Carter was told by then outgoing CIA Director Bush that he would not tell him about this issue, and he didn't say he didn't have information. He said, "I will not share that with you," and directed him to get it from the Congressional Research Service. Believe it or not, saying that to the incoming President of the United States. And this is well documented in Disclosure Project witness testimony from people who were privy to what happened. And I think that this is why folks have to understand that just because that someone is the president or the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, or for that matter, the head of the CIA, does not mean that they're going to even know about these operations. Now, when I first started out on this, it was an accident of what my real initial love was, and that is peaceful interstellar contact. I started out doing what I'm doing while I was working full-time as an emergency and trauma doctor in North Carolina, because I thought it was time for humans to show a different face to the cosmos. One that wasn't militaristic, one that wasn't xenophobic, one that wasn't fearful, but one that was hopeful and forward-looking. And so I founded the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence 25 years ago, in CSETI, C-S-E-T-I, to do exactly that. And so we set upon this project, sort of just grassroots, and right away, but within a year or two, we had contact. All of you know what happened near Pensacola, where we were out on a beach with about 50 people. A couple of them were Air Force pilots, a colonel and another guy. And there were 4 ET craft that materialized and vectored in and was filmed. Very poor film footage, old high-8, no night scopes, but it was actually quite close. This ended up on the front page of the Pensacola paper the next day. And that at that point, what I was doing got put on the radar scope of the national security state of folks dealing with this. This is the part of the story most people don't understand. I never intended to be involved with this aspect of it, because what I really wanted to do was create a grassroots movement that basically bypassed the US government or any other government to make contact with these civilizations as citizen diplomats. Much like Physicians for Social Responsibility were citizen diplomats to the Soviet Union during the coldest days of the Cold War, darkest days of the Cold War, but on an interplanetary, interstellar level. Unfortunately, I got diverted, not stopped from doing that other project, the CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind Initiative, which is when humans go out and intentionally make contact. But I was pulled into what I'm doing now with Disclosure Project because I was asked to. So within a month of that event in Florida in March of 1992, I was asked to go to a conference in Atlanta. Now, I thought it was just a conference. I got there and it was half of magic, this covert group that deals with UFOs there. The former head of Army Intelligence was there were NSA people there were DIA people there, et cetera and so on. And they proceeded to sort of ask me, what the hell do you think you're doing? I said, well, I'm doing what you can read. It's all public. I don't have any secrets about it. We're a team to make contact with these civilizations outside of governmental channels because the government is broken. And I was informed it was none of my business and not to do it. And I said, try stopping me. So we kind of had a mano a mano, was not pretty, till 3 in the morning in a hotel room. And, and I said, this is what I'm going to do. So there were people opposed to what the CE5 contact program was from the very, very earliest days. Most people don't realize that. On the other hand, there's a senior official at the CIA who flew down on a jet to my town in North Carolina, Asheville, North Carolina, to say, do it and don't give up. Someone's got to do this because it's completely out of control, and moreover, someone's going to have to spearhead not only making contact, but informing the public, because the system is so completely dysfunctional. Now, the person who was sent down was a man whose family founded the California Institute of Technology, one of the most prestigious universities in America, and is associated with the NSA and CIA. And I said, well, I'm a country doctor in North Carolina, rambling around in an ER, and I'm doing this sort of as just an ad hoc group to do this. He says, no, well, someone is going to have to do this, but also is going to have to educate the public. And I said, well, I'll do what I can in between ER shifts and raising 4 children. And as things went, that was sort of the initiation, and my initiation into this sort of weird, down the rabbit hole world of secret projects. I'm going, why is this guy coming as an emissary of this very senior CIA person who's involved in this, begging me to do something. Why don't they just do it? Anyway, so you're going to see this leitmotif repeated over and over again over the course of today. And at that point I said, okay, well, I will do what I can. And a few months later, there was a man named Bill Clinton, got elected to the presidency of the United States. And I was immediately approached by people who were friends of his, and who said, well, you know, this is something that he's very interested in, and it's well known that his good friend Webster Hubbell, who was third in command at Justice Department prior to being convicted of some other problems, said that Bill Clinton asked that he wanted to know about two things. Who really killed Marilyn Monroe, because he had a fascination with Marilyn Monroe, and who killed Jack Kennedy, and also, what is this UFO stuff? Is there anything really to it? So he made a directed inquiry, and as Webster Hubbell reported in his book, Friends in High Places, this is not, you can read it and see, they made inquiries into the subject, and they, quote, were not happy with the answers they were getting, which is a polite way of saying they know they were being lied to. Well, at about that time, and a little bit before some of the Clinton folks approached me, some military people who were friendly to disclosure approached me, who had had experiences either on battleships or at strategic air command facilities where nuclear facilities are hosted, and said, you know, I'll do anything I can to help you. And one of these men was a naval commander who was very connected up in the Pentagon, and he showed up at my door, basically, at my home, and I thought initially he was a spook, a spy. And I said, well, this spook is probably here to disrupt my project. And it turns out he was a totally stand-up guy who did everything he could to set up a number of the meetings you're going to hear about behind the scenes in deep background briefings that I did at the Pentagon subsequently. And we decided to have a meeting. I was invited by a former State Department person to have a meeting at the Monroe Institute, which is ironically about 10 minutes from where my country home is now in Virginia, to discuss how to put together a team of people to brief the correct folks in government and encourage them to end the secrecy. Now, you have to understand this is 1992, 93. 22 years ago, 21 years ago, I was in my 30s, a bit naive about how government worked. I actually thought we had a functional constitutional government. I've since learned we do not. That's all window dressing. That's all the Truman Show, like the movie The Truman Show, where it's all sort of a fake. And that there's a parallel governmental process that runs this and other important issues that are completely out of the reach of the people we elect and appoint. But at that time, so we had this meeting, and it was decided that we should contact certain key people in the U.S. government to, in military speak, deconflict the CSETI contact teams from Air Force and other military operations so that they didn't interfere with us and we didn't interfere with them. That was the purpose of it, was to deconflict that, because we didn't want interference from those guys with what we were doing, which we were getting a lot of interference. We were getting helicopters, jets, all kinds of stuff coming in to our contact sites, and we still do to this day, which have been filmed and documented. So unfortunately, we said this is something that is really critical if we're going to make contact and not have it become something where something terrible happens accidentally. Okay, so my military advisor who came forward said, let's see what I can do and run this up the flagpole, as they say. And so he knew the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, an admiral, who, Admiral Kramer with a C, C-R-A-M-E-R. And he went in, had a meeting, and said, look, we really need to have a meeting with the Air Force intel people at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, to which the Roswell remains were sent, and which still had what was called the National Air Intelligence Center, and then it became the Foreign Aerospace Technology Center. It was always FTD, Foreign Technology Division of the Air Force, back in the 40s and 50s. It's gone through many name changes. It's the same facility at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. And he said, okay, let's see if you can set up a meeting. And the admiral, now this is the head of intelligence, Joint Chiefs of Staff, pushed back from the desk and said, are you serious about UFOs and extraterrestrial intelligence? And the commander, military commander, who was volunteering to help us, said, yes, we're very serious. And so the admiral said, okay, I'll do it. So they refused to take the meeting. Now, so what happened is that J2, what's called J2, head of intelligence joint staff, called the head of Air Force intelligence and said, you will make this meeting happen. And Dr. Greer will be received there because they have something to discuss with those folks. And that was now the fall, September 1993. Okay, so that meeting was set up. Now, in the meanwhile, some folks working with Boutros Boutros-Ghali, the UN Secretary General at the time, and Lawrence Rockefeller, who was the scion of the Rockefeller family, who was the philosopher king of the family. I mean, David Rockefeller was sort of the money guy with Chase Manhattan, which became J.P. Morgan Chase. And his nephew, Jay Rockefeller, was chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. And Nelson Rockefeller, who had passed away, who had been vice president, ironically, was his brother, who had set up the Rockefeller Commission of 1956 that completely reorganized the Department of Defense and the CIA so no U.S. president could contain or control or penetrate UFO projects. So the Rockefeller family up to their eyeballs in this. Lawrence knew that, but he was on the side of the angels. He wanted to sort of cleanse the karma, as it were, I believe, of that family and actually help. So a lot of people have, of course, attacked me for knowing a Rockefeller as proof that I'm sort of part of some cabal. I said, no, they contacted me because Lawrence, knew that what we were doing was really novel and was effective because he had sent people, it turned out, to some of our events where we had contact, where we did the CE5 protocols and ET craft would appear and then disappear. He went, he took this information back to Lawrence and said, this is no joke. So Lawrence Rockefeller invited me up to New York and then invited me to his ranch, the JY Ranch in Wyoming. And as you know, that's where the Clintons, for the first couple years of their presidency, would vacation in August. But I was asked to go there in September of 1993 to basically share what he thought would just be the information about the CE5 initiative. Lawrence Rockefeller did not know about the initiative to brief senior governmental officials and encourage them to end the secrecy, which had started a few months prior to that at this meeting in Virginia at the Monroe Institute with a select number of folks that my military advisors had gathered together. That was July of '93. So he just thought it was going to be a discussion about the protocols of the CE5 initiative, remote viewing, making contact, interstellar diplomacy, all of these concepts. And so we decided that it was really time for us to go ahead and have some meetings like this with Lawrence. And I said, okay, I'll go because I have to go out. I'm on a trip anyway, taking time off from my medical work in the ER to go to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which also Lawrence knew nothing about. Lawrence Rockefeller knew nothing about. So here's what happened. I was going to go to the Rockefeller Ranch just as sort of a guest to share this, and during the course of a sort of a round table, and there were all kinds of people there. Robert Bigelow of Bigelow Aerospace, who's a billionaire, was there, a whole bunch of people who of various backgrounds in the UFO subculture, some friendly to what we do and some incredibly unfriendly, who we found out were working for the intelligence community, were there. And there was this gathering at this famous Rockefeller Ranch in the Grand Tetons. So one day it came up what else I was working on. I said, well, we've initiated a project to brief senior government officials in the Clinton administration and the Pentagon and members of Congress so that we can terminate secrecy on this issue and get the government to change policy, because we understand that the incoming president is favorable to that idea, which was, of course, Bill Clinton. And as a result, you could have heard a pin drop in the room. Nobody knew at all. And the first thing Lawrence Rockefeller said, what, it was like this. Where are you doing? I said, well, I'm going straight to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base after this meeting to brief the colonel over this Foreign Technology Division of the Air Force. And then I'm going to, in a couple months, brief President Clinton's CIA director. So at this point, Lawrence Rockefeller and everyone there were in a state of shock. Now, that initiated what has been incorrectly called the Rockefeller Initiative. There was no Rockefeller Initiative. Let me explain that in a moment. What it was an initiative because he found out what we were doing and his people said, you've got to get involved with this. So Lawrence wanted to play a behind-the-scenes role, and that's why he was willing to host the President and First Lady at the ranch to provide what we put together, which was called the best available evidence. Which is the collection of best cases, best photos, best government documents we had that were extant at that time in 1993. So the president was invited out in the following summers, 2 summers, to the Rockefeller Ranch for that purpose. And the UN Secretary General in the meanwhile and his wife came to some meetings in what are called salons. A salon is when someone hosts a very nice meeting in a private home with dignitaries, and you have a guest, usually some surprise guest or some interesting character like me, to come in and inform the New York 100 about what's going on. So that's what I did, and they were incredibly successful. Subsequent to that, Mrs. Boutros-Ghali invited us to have a meeting at the UN so I could brief a lot of the diplomats and friends of hers in the UN who were supportive of ending secrecy and making peaceful interplanetary contact. And actually, Leah Ghali herself hosted that for me at the United Nations.